This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air for the first time with Lâle Davidson. Welcome to the Fam Electric Ghost podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So I wanted to let people know, if you can see the icon up there, listen on Newsly. We are a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. And for all of the audience out there, there's a coupon code of Ghost to get 1 month free premium subscription to check that out. That's an audio only podcast platform, and we'll be on Newsly later tonight. So I want to thank you for being on the show. We do. We're actually at episode. This episode, we're actually at, I believe, like 976 episodes
Wow.
of the Fam Electric Ghost podcast with this episode, and we're going to talk about the focus here is the magic realism of Lâle Davidson. And then I've got your website up for those that can check that out. It'll be clickable, but for those of you listening, it's lollydavidson.com, and that'll be fully clickable on all the platforms we're on. So if somebody goes to that website, what would they find there?
They would find links to all my books to if they wanted to buy them. They'll find some of my blog entries and some writing exercises and things like that. It's my author page.
That's cool. So they can get to you there. They can find your book material and
Yeah.
connect. So that's great. And again, thank you for being on the program. Now,
Mm.
you have been an author, and you have this concept of magic realism. I don't know if you want to talk about your author, how you came to be an author, or talk about that topic of magic realism. Maybe give a background first.
Yeah, I guess they kind of go together. So I really I was introduced to magic realism via Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Colombian writer, the author of 100 Years of Solitude, which is a Pulitzer Prize winner from, I think, 1965. And he really coined the phrase magic realism. And it's typically defined as kind of realistic fiction with surreal elements. But I think it goes deeper than that. I think it's the result of a collision of two cultures. And so for Gabriel Garcia Marquez, it was the collision of Catholicism, of Spanish Catholicism with indigenous beliefs. And so I think that's why you get sort of these kind of almost clashing realities. So, for example, one wonderful
Mm-hmm.
episode in his book, 100 Years of Solitude, is the son is shot, and when he's shot, his blood spills out of the wound and goes down the street, takes a right and then a left, and then it goes, up the steps to his mother's house. So his blood returns to his mother, and that's a
So that's
typical example. Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of
So,
fantastical magic, or
ye-
strange like spirit, different than what you would think in like Western culture.
right, and I think
Maybe
that,
you wouldn't
and
expect
different than sorry. And different than fantasy also, where fantasy is a kind of a closed system. Like you read a book about dragons and you expect there to be a dragons. That's the
that.
world. But in magic realism, the world it tilts a bit.
Yeah,
You
it's
know?
almost like another plane. Like you're getting into like a different dimensional plane where different things are possible. Like maybe something gravity is not as powerful when things can go the other opposite way, and you're like, how does that happen?
Right, right. People can, like again, in 100 Years of Solitude, somebody actually bodily ascends to heaven, like she doesn't, it's not just her spirit, the whole body goes up. So, yeah, I think
Whole
that
body goes up.
yeah. Yeah. So that really it spoke to me I think because I grew up traveling all over the world. My parents were English professors and they loved to spend like they would go for a year at a time to another country and then we would be immersed in another culture and another language and
Mm,
really so what happens is you begin to understand that cultures are different, reality is different in those different cultures, and so it kind of
mhm.
broadened my mind, and I think that's why that genre really appealed to me.
That's interesting because I spent 2 years in Tokyo with my family. My daughter was able to go to a Japanese preschool and a
Yeah,
kindergarten, and we got introduced to Shinto culture and as being a
amazing.
gaijin and also being gaijin. But we were because we were there not as like tourists. We lived there as expats. I had a job.
Right.
I'm in
Right.
downtown Tokyo, and my daughter's going to a Japanese school. So it was a really interesting experience because I had to start to learn in terms of business. I was there with an American company that had a Japanese subsidiary, and so we were
Yes.
trying to do stuff in that market, and it was a different mindset. They were like
Yeah.
we had situations where Japanese executives would go and rent an auditorium and apologize to the customers if they made a mistake, and
Wow.
Americans were like we don't do that. I said,
No,
well,
never apologize.
boss, you're just here for the week. It's like in this market we have to do that, and if we don't,
Yeah.
these other companies are going to beat us. And they're like
Yes.
they couldn't. Sometimes they couldn't get the American executives to understand the cultural differences. They thought they could kind of force things, and it's like it's
Yeah.
not going to work.
No. Yeah,
But
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, but I love the ideas like the Shinto culture, like nine-tailed foxes and all these spirit animals, and being part,
Yeah.
being Native American part. I'm Cherokee and Blackfoot part, and
Ah,
there was a
there you go.
similarity between the spirit animals in the Eastern Japanese mindset and some of the Cherokee and Blackfoot spirit animals, the same kind of ideas. And I'm like, wow, that's really
Yeah.
interesting. Totally
Yeah.
different parts of the world, but similar concepts. And so I
Well,
thought
and of
that
course,
was really interesting. I was more predisposed to that.
yeah,
But
that's
yeah, go ahead.
fascinating, and of course, that's one of the conjectures is that the indigenous people of America actually came over from Asia when the land masses were connected. So
Yeah.
that might be, in fact, that they were the same culture at some point.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
have a lot of like a lot of similarities in terms of like the concept of the planet and the wind and the environment and the spirit animals and the depth of what the stories are. If you
Right.
go through all the Japanese stories and they're kind of fables and mysticism, and you're like, wow, it's thousands of years old. And you check like the oral histories of the Indian cultures in the States or North
Yeah.
America, even Central America, you're like in South America, like there's a lot of things that are kind of crossing. They're like the similarities are like very interesting. It's like, yeah, there's definitely
Yes.
something there.
Yes, and then also, like, some American authors, some indigenous American authors, Louise Erdrich and Leslie Marmon Silko, they are, indigenous, and they also you'll see that kind of magic realism, and, I think the term has changed, it's now called fabulism, like, based on fable, and
Oh,
I
that's
think
an
that that may have been because some people might have considered it an insult to call it magic realism because they were like, wait a minute,
oh,
this is not magic, this is my
that's
culture,
that's their
but I
culture.
think it's a compromise term, it's a term that
Mhm.
explains
Where your head's
that.
where you're
Yeah,
taking.
yeah.
So, like, you had a not well, you've got a couple novels that I have in your write up of Blue Woman Burning, and which is a magical, realistic coming of age novel, and
Mhm.
Against the Grain, an environmental thriller with a mystical twist. So I don't know which
Yes.
one did you want to kind of talk about, and then you have a collection called Strange Appetites. But which one did you want to kind of go through first? I don't know if it's sequentially or from where your mind's at right now.
Yeah, well, I can talk about Blue Woman Burning first. That was my first novel, and it's semi-autobiographical. And, our family lived in Chile for a year and a half, and I was about 11 or 12, and it really had a big impact on me. That there was something about the culture and the country and the landscape that sort of wrote themselves into my soul.
Mm.
And I think that's probably why I was so attracted to Garcia Marquez. But, and we actually drove all the way back from Santiago, Chile, all the way up to New York State in a sedan, um,
Oh,
like a
wow.
not even a camping, no camper, just a sedan. And so the novel starts in South America and with the family, much like my family, traveling in the Altiplano, and they're in this high desert, and the mother vanishes, and I won't give it away how she vanishes, but it's by this strange magical way that does not make sense. They see it, but they can't believe it. And then she's gone. And then the rest of the novel is the young woman is now an adult, and she and her brother are very bonded with each other, and he is suicidal, and she's trying to save him. And so the whole journey is a journey of recovery, both recovery of herself. She's in trying to recover her brother, she's trying to recover herself. So yeah, so there's a lot of magical elements in there. I
I
felt
always
like in
found that. Yeah, go ahead.
I, I said, well, I always felt like in my family, reality was in question. My parents were wonderful parents, but they were complicated. My mother was probably a classic, very generous narcissist, and my father suffered from bipolar disorder. So, there was a lot of like, what's going on here? And they were like, nothing's going on. It's fine. Everything's fine. It's like, no, this is, this is not right. So there was a lot of that going on in my family. So that's, I think, why I wrote the book in that magical realist way. And I guess I was also trying to look at, and I think this is a really relevant issue today, is, with all the question of sort of what's true with facts and alternative facts. I think
Oh
what we're
yeah.
running, yeah, we're running into a big culture clash.
Well, you have so much information, and now you've got AI.
Yeah.
So you've got this artificial intelligence that can kind of wrap people's minds around things, and you don't know what's authentic and what's not. You already had people who would spin the truth and kind
Right.
of do it for their own interest. And now you've
Right.
got computers that will do it, that have this artificial intelligence, and they actually are serving the interest of whoever built them.
Yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
found that like there was a thing where like if you asked some of these AI their parent company what they something about the parent company like IBM or Microsoft, and you ask
Uh-huh.
them a question, they won't answer it
Huh.
because they're supposed to be artificial intelligence, but they seem to have a block on if you ask them something about their parent, then they
Yeah.
don't want to talk about it. And so, well, they must have put a rule saying they can't
Yeah.
talk. So,
Right.
you're like, so
Yeah.
how much of this is like, how much of this do you really can you really believe if there are people pulling strings like puppets? And you're like,
Right.
it causes people to not have belief and
Right.
information because they used to be like, oh, you go to New York Times, that's the truth. You go to Wall Street
Right.
Journal, that's the truth. CBS
Right.
News, that's the truth. But now you're like,
Right.
I got a million sources and which one's true? Well, the
Who
one
to
I like to
believe.
hear. The one I like
Right.
to hear. That's the problem.
Right. Right. No, I think the way to, and in my novel, I really deal with that is, how do you tell what's real? And I conclude that it's certainly not easy, right? But there are three or four things that can help you kind of narrow it down. And one is a strong connection to the earth, because the earth is pretty darn real. And a connection to others, to community, a deep connection to yourself, but all, corroboration. That's why, with all these
Yeah.
different news sources, how do you figure out what's real? Well, if you read from a variety of different sources, from a variety of different slants, you can arrive at something that approximates the truth. But you
Yeah.
have to make that effort, and you have to question and be skeptical.
Yeah, like back in college, I'm a sociology and political science major, and I had to, I went to Bowdoin, and we had to source our stuff. We had to write research papers and do it in the correct way. So that
Right.
can't be guilty of plagiarism. You have to sort, do the end notes and the footnotes, and cite your sources. And what is your original thought that came from reading this, and what is verbatim what you pulled from the book.
Right.
And I think
Right.
that's the problem today is people don't know where those end notes or footnotes are.
No, and
Because
they
these
don't
some of
put them in.
these
Yeah.
the media sources don't really show it. And so
Right.
you're living in this world where you don't have where the written word, you could see it. You could see
Yeah.
those footnotes, you could see the citations, you could see, oh, I took it from this is a quote from this person. Now people have kind of skipped all that. And it's like,
Right.
well, that's not helpful.
Yeah. No. No. So yeah, and then my second novel, the environmental thriller with a mystical twist. The mystical twist. So that one is very much about activists. It's based on the true story of Redwood Summer, where all these activists were doing things like tree sitting. They were sabotaging, bulldozers to save these ancient old growth redwoods, and they're still
Mm,
doing it today. But I really wanted the trees to have a voice. So there are little tiny chapters, where I studied up on how do trees actually communicate, and they do. It turns out they
They do
communicate
talk, yeah,
through aerosols and through the
chemicals.
mycorrhizal fungi in the ground. So, they actually are quite altruistic. Like a tree that's in the shade might lend some of its sun energy to, I mean,
A younger
or
tree or
vice
something.
versa. Yeah. So, but yeah, so I have them speaking in English, but I needed to make them sound more like trees, so they have their own vocabulary. So
Oh,
they
wow. That's
they look like, I figured people are very self-centered. We tend to look at the world through the lens of who we are, and sort of, again, sort of expect people to be like us. And I thought, well, maybe trees are a little bit the same way. So they expect to have roots. And so when they look at humans, they call us the rootless ones, because we don't have any
that's
roots,
right.
and they call us the clever tongues because we are very good at language, better than our feathered and furred relatives.
Mm,
Uh,
that's interesting. Well, I think that's
yeah,
really cool when you bring out that kind of, um, whether like it's mystical, magical, or fable thinking, because that's why
yeah,
I get drawn to the East. You know, like I watch a lot of K drama or Chinese drama, Japanese dramas,
hmm,
because what I found was really interesting watching those Asian dramas was that they would do things like what you're talking about. Like with American
yeah,
stories, a lot of times today, they won't do something fantastical about what you're doing with the trees.
right,
They'll
right.
but a lot of times in Asian dramas, they'll bring up spiritual things that go back like 3,000 years, or they'll bring up something that is not a typical story, that
Uh,
usually involves some kind of mysticism within their cultural history. And you're like,
yeah,
why can't we do that? Because we're thinking so,
so human
kind of
centered.
narrow-minded.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
the
not thinking
Western
about
white.
bringing animals and
Right. So you must love Miyazaki, the Miyazaki movies. Have
yeah,
you seen the ah,
yeah,
I
all
I
of them.
adore those. Oh yeah, Spirited Away,
Yeah, they're all
Princess
incredible.
Mononoke. Love them. Yeah. Yeah.
But they
It's a
got
good
that
world.
connection to nature. You have this nature kind of environmentalism, and it's inherent in his work. And then you look at Tezuka, he's kind of like the Disney of Japanese animators. He
Right.
came up with like this thing called White Lion, which is like a precursor to, a lot of like Lion King. A lot of people have kind of said that Disney kind of
Oh.
took Lion King from Tezuka's White Lion, which
Oh,
is
I
in the
don't.
it's in the 50s. There was this White Lion Japanese character is a lot like the
Oh
Lion King.
yeah.
You
Yeah.
actually go watch it, you're like, "This seems like they lifted some of this." But,
That's not related to that there was a cartoon when I was a kid called Simba the White Lion. Was that
well, there's actual Tezuka created a character called the White Lion. I don't
yeah.
know if it's, exactly the same, but, there's been a controversy if you read the history on it where they think like, Tezuka is considered kinda like the Japanese Disney in terms of the character. He
Mm,
created Astro Boy, he created White Lion, he created a lot of different, like, iconic
mhm,
characters within the
mhm.
anime, manga area that are very
Oh, I'll have
deep, and, like, not just children read the stuff, and, like, adults would read his work. So
how
that
do
was
you
the
spell
interest of
how
Tezuka.
do you s yeah,
I
h
think it's Tezuka.
Tezu, Tezuka, I'll have to check that out.
It's very
Um,
interesting work, yeah.
yeah,
It's very
yeah.
fantastical. There's a lot of stuff that it deals with, like, I mean, Astro Boy is a child inside of a robot,
Oh,
you know
interesting.
a child that it dies, and then his father puts him into the robot. And this is, like, in the
Yeah.
1950s.
Wow.
He came up with that, and then, they had all kinds of other concepts that are very interesting, and they did grab the imagination of not just children. And
Yeah.
that's what's cool about their that work was it was meant for everyone, adults. When I was in Japan, you would see salarymen reading manga on the
Yeah.
train.
Interesting.
Like
Yeah.
we read the paper, they didn't consider that, "Oh, that's kid stuff." Like, no, it's like it was like part of the culture. It's like and there's a lot of magical stuff going on. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so we can continue talking about, like, the idea of the trees. It kinda brought me there that I don't really see a lot of other maybe there's a movement that I'm not aware of, and more of an underground independent authors are into this
Mhm.
more. But yeah, I was always finding that very interesting. I was drawn into that.
Thank you. Yeah, I have seen more and more books coming out sort of about trees talking, and of course there's nonfiction books, The Hidden Life of Trees by Peter Wohlleben, which was based largely on the research of Suzanne Simard. And she's come out with her own book as well, the title of which escapes me at the moment. But Suzanne Simard is the scientist who did a lot of this work and discovered that trees make sound and things like that. So yeah, and then the my most recent novel that's coming out in October is actually a ghost story. And I
Mm.
thought um, I wanted it to have a larger cultural kind of echo. So it's Saratoga Springs, which is where I live in upstate New York, was a very wealthy Victorian town at some point, lots of wealth, lots of very rich people coming up here in the 1890s. And then, of course, then it kind of went through this economic slump in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And then it's kind of come back. So it's kind of booming. So there's huge um, there's a huge divide. Not so much in Saratoga because Saratoga's pushed out everybody who can't afford to live in that city.
Unfortunately, yeah.
And so I thought, I really wanted to do a story about, the people, the haves and the have-nots, the marginalized and the privileged, and how that's haunting us. There are certain truths there
Yeah.
that are haunting all of us and creating havoc for everyone. So the surface plot is that a young woman, um, her father has died and she's been repressing her supernatural powers, but she's drawn to this young man who's of Puerto Rican descent. He's a Puerto Rican American, and they just kind of connect very deeply. And they get involved in searching out this house. There's a house that was built by a wealthy Black family in the 1890s, and it's slated for demolition to make room for a big box store by the white city council. And so they start, they investigate the house and unwittingly unleash all these powers. And
Oh
her,
wow.
the yeah, so now she's got
You got a lot of
to,
things going on. You got a lot of
yeah,
levels there. You got multiculturalism. You're making a statement
yeah,
about the have and the have-nots. So it's
yeah,
that's I like the layers of all the things. It's very today, and that's kind of where the world is like this
yeah,
multicultural world and this structured world, and you've got the have and the have-nots, and
yep,
people kind of
yep,
more adventurous that connect across boundaries, and then the
right,
ghost, which
right,
then
right.
the cool thing I always liked about kind of fiction, that Rod Serling used to do, is that you could make statements about
Yes,
what's going on, but he said, "Well, it's fiction, it's science fiction, or it's fantasy," so people didn't take it as you could kinda sneak it in. You could tell
yes,
have your point of view and not be told, like, well, you're being some kinda, like, nonfiction account of a societal problem. You put it into a fictional account, and you can address it in that way and kinda still reach people with your message.
yeah, yeah. I think Toni Morrison, also a Pulitzer Prize winning novelist who, also beloved is very much magic realism. I think she said fiction is truer than reality.
Yeah.
Uh, and there's a fable, there's a kind of a little story because I'm also a storyteller. So I spend a lot of time with folk tales, and there's a little story about how nobody wants truth. Truth is naked and shows up at people's doors, and everybody shuts the door. So story dresses herself up so that she can speak
Yeah.
the truth that people won't hear otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah, I was always, like, drawn into, like, these, like, morality lessons on the Twilight Zone that Rod Serling, like, the monsters on Maple Street isn't on face value exactly what it is. It's like a deeper statement about
Yes.
what's going on, but because it's kind of in a fictional science fiction way, you can present it. And Gene Roddenberry used to do it on Star Trek. He'd have these, like,
Yes.
morality plays about this, but, "Oh, we're in space, and this is the Klingons, and it's these people," but it's actually talking about what was going on today, but put
Yes.
it in a different way so that you can you can actually stomach it, to get it past the censors and get it on TV. Like,
Yeah,
but
yeah, and that's
I
funny
think it's
because I grew
I
up
was always
watching
into
both of those shows. Yeah, yeah.
that. Yeah, this seems to me that's always interesting. I always loved reading, you know, Ray Bradbury and Harlan Ellison and people like
Oh,
that. It
yeah.
was just I love how they would they would have these elements of actual real political issues masked
Yes.
within the fiction, within the science fiction, and it's cool that you're talking about that. The whole idea of the have and the have-nots and exploring that, and then put the ghost in the story. So maybe you could talk about how the ghost situation. Maybe I don't know if you want to build as much as you
Yeah,
can.
yeah.
Not
Well,
like throw.
he gets possessed. Damien, the love interest, gets possessed by a spirit from in the house. And they think initially that what had happened is when the city council, there was the last descendant of this wealthy family, that is still living in the house when the city council first they tried to seize it by eminent domain. And so he fought them off, and the family had lost their wealth over the decades. So there really wasn't much of the farm left. So he was just hanging on, and he dies. He in a in there's a it seems as if he's committed suicide. That's the story. So when this young couple is searching the house and Damien becomes possessed, they assume that it must be the owner of the house, the former owner of the house. Um, but it's more complicated than that, of course. And there's her father. Meanwhile, you get the story of her father who's died, but you get sort of the backstory, and he also is being haunted by um, in real life in 1876 there was this guy named Henry Hilton who came into his wealth by, and this is a true story, by really strange means. He was a lawyer for this guy named whose last name was Stewart, who was he was like the fourth richest man in America. He started the big department stores in New York City. And
Hmm,
this man left all his money to Hilton, the lawyer, which was very odd. It was like, why would he do that?
wait, what?
He had a wife.
Yeah,
So
why
Henry
would you do
Hilton
that?
moved up to he moved up to Sarah. Well, what was weird too is that 2 years later, after Stewart died, somebody broke into the mausoleum and stole his body.
Wow,
That's true, and they never
that's
found the bone.
strange.
They never
Yeah,
found the
stories like that are
bones.
very strange. You
So
always wondered, like, a big mystery, like, what's going on?
yeah,
They never solved it, right? No one ever found
yeah.
out why.
So this guy Hilton, he moves up to Saratoga Springs. He's an anti-Semite. He owns this grand hotel, and he puts up a sign that no Jews are allowed. And this was Saratoga Springs was a big vacation, destination for the
Yeah,
wealthy
yeah.
Jewish gentry. And so this causes a scandal across the country. And it's part of the beginning of his downfall. But he also built these 6 lavish mansions on the property that now is Skidmore College. And
Mm.
they were silk paneled. He had a racetrack. He created this park that was with the same architect that created Central Park in New York City. He had,
Oh, wow.
racing dogs. He used to ostentatiously ride around in this carriage with a bugler on the back, and he just spent money wildly. And when he died, he barely had any
Yeah.
money from his fortune left. But the houses were abandoned. He had children. And the question is, why didn't the children take over the houses? Why did they leave the houses? And the houses were just abandoned, and they gradually just fell down or burned down or rotted to pieces. So again, here's this
Wow.
mystery of like, what happened here? So I won't tell you. You'll have to read the book.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So that's
that's
the
right, yeah, yeah, it's interesting 'cause,
yeah, and
well, yeah, you can imagine, like, it's like, I think there's this quote when you're writing a story, I think there's this famous, I was in class in school, baby shoes never worn. That's
Yeah.
like that idea that
Hemingway.
you leave that Hemingway, you leave that line open, and you're like, what can you imagine happen? And
Right.
then that's kind of like that's why you read, because when you have a good writer that kind of leaves something open,
Right.
and then you're like, oh, that's why you get into books
Yeah,
because
exactly.
it's that world. We try to create worlds as musicians so that we draw you in.
Yes.
But we're
Right.
in an age where people only want to listen to 2 minutes, and I don't get started until maybe like the fourth minute. So my songs are like
Ah,
8 and 9 minutes long. Is like, and that's not what's going on today. But I'm still
yeah.
kind of a believer in the longer form because I don't
Yeah.
get like if you have movements and changes, you can't get that done in 2 minutes.
Right.
So it's
I
like I
love that
want people
idea.
to get drawn in, and you can't really
Right.
get drawn in if it's kind of like fast food music. Then
Right.
it's not really
Right.
going to draw you into the structure of the changes and the key changes and the rhythm. It's like you're trying to tell chapters. You're telling like a sound painting or sound
Right.
story.
Right.
So
Right.
I've always been into like multiple art forms
Yeah, I
of
love
like,
that sound story.
yeah, because you read Shakespeare. I mean, I read Blake, I read Tennyson, I read Longfellow,
Uh-huh.
Wordsworth. I used to get into that because I like the long form to kind of drive you. And you think about like people in the past, like the Beatles, Abbey Road, and Sgt. Pepper's. Like they with these scene changes, it's meant to be heard as a whole. It's not meant to
Right.
be each song. You're supposed to listen to that whole piece because they all kind of flow as one big work. And
Yes.
I was always drawn into that rock operas and like Tommy and things like
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Just to get because I wanted it to be mean something bigger than just the music.
Yes.
A lot of
Right.
times, to me, it is something bigger than the music. So
Right.
yeah, the cool thing about the form you're in, you draw people in, and they stay in your book. They don't just go read the cliff notes or read the cover
Yeah.
and then say,
W
"Oh, I'm done."
right.
You
Well,
have to get drawn in.
that is the hope, and that's definitely I'm trying to do is and I would say Blue Woman Burning is probably more literary, in the sense that it's more densely written, but yes, I really wanna write I really like to write books that do draw people in, that there is an element of mystery and suspense that pulls you through the like, you're like, "What's gonna happen next?" But that are also thought provoking. I want
Mhm.
people to reflect later and put the pieces together themselves, and I think I've done that. So I think it's both fun and thought provoking, and you get you get out of it what you put into it.
But you also you're a climate change activist. That you want some of your activism to kind of be within your work, and a lot of musicians were the same way. Like if we have some political idea beliefs, it somehow gets it's in our music. You think about Dylan when he
Yeah.
was in
Oh,
his protest phase, he was
yep,
talking about the civil rights movement. His music
yep,
was all about that. And then he
yep,
got out of it and said, "Why? I don't know why I was doing that." But it's like, well, you did.
yeah,
but
yeah.
but
There's a
I was like,
debate
"What
about
happened?"
and there's a debate about that, like you don't want to be didactic in your fiction. You don't want to be lecturing to people. So there's a danger
Yeah,
to being, too overtly
and too
political.
connected.
On the other hand, I don't think there's any such thing as apolitical. I don't think you can have a song that is apolitical. It's
Yeah, it's
just
gonna say something.
it's got a context, you know.
Yeah,
So
no, you're always gonna say something unless you're gonna do it like Wooly Bully. Then you're saying like these kind of nonsense songs.
yeah,
Some of those like like okay, what is that? Like Wooly Bully, how much is the dog eating window? It's like okay, if you just want to write that, that's fine. But like
right,
I'd rather have something that, like that has an impact.
right,
but
right. Me too.
some people they want to avoid the impact and come up with some kind of nonsensical mindset that's just a groove and just a
Yeah,
phrase, and it doesn't
yeah,
mean it. Well, maybe it means something, but I don't know. But
right.
so, as a climate change activist, do you try to weave that into a lot of your work lately? I mean, it seems like it's a common theme in some of your work, but
Yes, it's woven throughout. I don't know about the short stories so much, but it is woven all the way through all 3 novels. So in Blue Woman Burning, like I said, sort of the connection to Earth ends up being really transformative and very important to emotional development and a sense of community. And then of course, in Against the Grain, the main character, there's a young man whose father was a logger, but he was a traditional logger. And there's a hedge fund operator who's come in and he's taken over this traditional logging company, and he started to
Oh,
accelerate the tree felling rate. And his daughter falls in love with the activist, of course. It's Romeo and Juliet. But there's a certain point in the book where the young man, the Logan, who is the logger, and activist, um, he ends up, he's so angry at at the young woman's father, that he ends up doing some really bad things to this man, to Diana's father. And
mm,
I'm, as a writer, I'm not condoning that. Like, I don't think that you should go, and I don't
yeah,
think violence is the solution. But my character does that, and has to go through his own, growth as he, explores. He finds himself doing things that he never thought he would do, and that he really thinks are wrong. But he's so angry, he can't control himself. So yeah, and I feel that way. I feel like I can't believe that we have known for really 40 years about climate change. And for 40 years, we've been ringing this bell saying, we've got to do something, got to do something. And, we couldn't
you get time to pay
get
it.
any traction. And now
Yeah,
here we
no,
are, and people are suffering from, fires and floods, and we're going to have more of the same. And we still can't get our government to act.
yeah. Well, it's kind of like the industrial military complex that Eisenhower warned about. Like if
Yeah,
you let it get too powerful, they control all the shots, and you can say X, but like if the interest of humanity is to not be on carbon, but
right.
there's a group of like under 10,000 people that make a lot of money from carbon,
Yeah,
they're going to run carbon into the ground at the expense of everybody else. And so profit is overriding logic and overriding humanity. And then it's going to be up to the people on the planet right now are going to have to make a statement.
yeah,
They're going to have to take action at some
yeah,
level because, like, once you get major cities underwater, once you have climate, refugees in the West, not in other places, this finally hits the West, then it finally hits their head. Oh,
yeah.
I'm a refugee from New York City. I'm a refugee from Boston. I'm a refugee from Florida. Then it finally hits your head that you should do something.
Right. Right,
That's the
right. When
problem.
it's
It's like you have to get
That is the
forced to
problem.
to
Yep.
hit to hit the people like that have a lot to lose, but like they never thought they were going to lose it.
Right.
Then suddenly you
Yeah.
take action. You kind of like the world's going to question, why didn't you take action when it happened to other people?
Right.
you know?
Yeah, and one of the things that really is upsetting about this is that I think both the right and the left in this country understand that the wealthy have gotten too wealthy. They've gotten too powerful, and they're squeezing us regular folks way too hard. And we
Yeah,
agree on that. But we're so busy hating each other and vilifying each other that we can't unite, which is exactly where they want us. They don't want us to unite.
yeah. Well, it's like divide
So,
and conquer. I mean, the thing is, like,
right,
it's holistic thinking. Like, it's part of the whole thing we're talking about. The like, what information do you believe? If you
right.
start to look at the way the information is being manipulated, it's
Yep.
being manipulated for the benefit of those people in that kind of carbon group. They want to
Yeah.
keep on stay on oil, stay on coal, stay on gas, and run
Yep.
it to the last minute. And a lot of what they're doing is to divide and conquer. I'm a political science major, so I look at the history of warfare and the history
Right.
of information, disinformation, and how you use it. And there's like a lot of stuff going on. You won't be in a conspiracy theory, but if you look at the people who have the most and the things they want and the laws they're putting in place and the
Yep.
restrictions they're putting in place, it aligns to a common theme. And it
Yeah.
usually common themes aren't by accident.
No. No, I call it affirmative action for the rich. There's a lot of affirmative action for the rich. They get lower interest rates. they get, they're first in line to get the loans. I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
if one of them loses money, there's always a friend who gives them more money. I mean, it's just incredible. It's
But it's
anyway, we're
amazing to
getting
me
pretty
is like you
political
can
here.
in a country that yeah, but I think part of it is like, if we think about what the norms are, and you
Yeah,
get people to get outraged to give a poor person a piece of bread. Some people will get
yeah,
morally outraged about giving that person bread, but they're not morally outraged about building a neutron bomb. And I'm like,
right,
really?
right, right.
So I mean, it's a mindset. Like, if you're going to think about the future of humanity, why is giving somebody a piece of bread a problem and building billions of dollars to build a thing that kills millions of people? That's not a problem. So
Right.
that's where the mindset people have got to start taking ownership of their brain,
Yeah.
And I think
Yep.
writers and creators, we have a responsibility to create art that kind of, if you have something to say, put it in your work. And I really commend you for putting your climate change activism in your work because that's hard. I mean, some people are like, well, I don't know if I should do that because I'm going to lose this audience. I'm going to lose this. Like,
Yeah.
you do what you feel you should do, right? As a writer, that if that's what you're interested in, and that's what you wanna
Yeah.
push out as an idea and then weave it into your work, why not? Why can't you
Yeah.
have that voice?
Right. And I think also, learning to disagree civilly. I'm a professor, I teach, it's interesting. My undergraduate major was also sociology, not political science, but sociology, anthropology. But I teach writing at the community college level. And, I'm always telling students how important it is to say what you think, look for evidence, but also be respectful of people who have different opinions.
Yeah, other
Like
people's
we
yeah,
that's democracy can't work unless we can talk to people we disagree with civilly and not get angry at them and not vilify them,
yeah.
but just go, well, that's a really interesting perspective. Here's how I see it. Like we need more of that cross dialogue. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the
So
ideas is like it's supposed to be, yeah, a conversation of ideas, but if you have, like, the state idea, and that's the only idea,
right.
is and then who's running that state? And that's the problem right now, is like it's
Yeah.
so extreme. Like you got some, people on one side or the other. Where's the gray? Where's the
Yeah.
negotiation? Where are the diplomats? Where are the
Yeah.
senators who could work out a deal and between both sides, right?
Yeah.
And that's where we're missing kind of at our in our structure, the ability to compromise. And that
Yeah.
is like, that's just something that's like that should be an adult positive thing. It's like, okay, have your argument, have your debate, take it to a vote, and then you get people like, well, don't have the vote. They try to not have the vote. They try to
Yes.
control so you can't even bring it to the table. It's like, well, what's that? That doesn't
Yeah.
feel right based on our
That's
tradition of we're supposed to be in a tradition where we can have that debate.
Right, it's manipulation of the system. I agree that a lot of things get stuck in committee that and exactly, yeah. So
Yeah.
the thing about music and fiction is that it brings our heart along too, and I think, that's the other thing I tell my students when I'm teaching public speaking is that, it's logos, ethos, and pathos. You can't just convince people with logic. You also need the pathos. You need to be a credible human being and, conduct yourself with in an ethical way, but people are not moved unless they are emotionally moved, and that's why I love fiction, frankly. So because
That's why
because it
if you go see it, yeah, I mean, if you see an actor do like a
ah,
off off Broadway work, and they're maybe like a method actor, and
yeah,
every day you go see them, they're just into that character, and you're like, wow, they
yeah,
they own it, and it's like very, to me that's like a pure art form. When you see somebody they can do the method acting or they can do that live acting, and they're not doing cuts, it's like it's a real thing. And that's why
yeah,
I've always been into, like, freeform jazz and bebop and fusion just 'cause, like, you're gonna just let it be what it is, and you kinda play off the happy accident. If something
right,
happens, you just play off it, you don't stop, you let it happen. And,
yeah,
when you get to that skill level where you're an artist that can kind of deal with the in the moment flow state
Mhm.
and not
Mhm.
think of it as a problem, but think of it as an opportunity.
Yeah.
That to me is like where I like to deal with, artists that are very, authentic. I'm looking for authenticity in a world where there's sampling and AI and cloning and copying, and I'm looking for, that kinda, thinking about Neil Young and Buffalo Springfield or somebody just willing to go and let their voice, like, scratch a little bit or be off pitch and put it down and say, "That's good. That's good
Yeah.
the way it is."
Yep.
Like, why not?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, that improv is really amazes me. I was trained as a classical musician, so we don't do improv, and I think it's so daring, but it's like you said, kind of entering into a flow state. It's a different part of your brain. I was just reading, there's a book called Your Brain on Art, and they were talking about how, yeah, the critical when you are when you're saying lines that you've memorized, you've got some part of your brain is watching yourself and monitoring yourself. But when you improvise, that monitoring brain turns off because it has to in order to trust yourself to fall like that,
Yeah.
to just, you know, I really
Yeah, you
admire.
become yeah,
Yeah.
it's just cool when you actually become, when you see a great actor, a master actor
Yeah.
become the character and they can just flow with it in any situation and just actually they're become that person so they can just respond because they're thinking they are that person, right? And then when
Right.
you're in that music flow state, it's kinda like the same thing. It's like I'm in the moment of this creation and I'm
Yep.
just gonna flow with whatever is happening. And
Yeah.
that is a hard thing if you're like I started sight reading. And then when I really started getting into writing, I kinda went away from it. I stopped putting the bars down, I stopped doing the sheet music, I just started trusting myself and just putting it down.
Wow.
And then when you trust yourself, you put it down, you'll remember it without being on a page, and then it'll
Wow.
evolve. And you get these
Interesting.
pieces that evolve because, like, yeah, why wouldn't it evolve? A lot of
Yeah.
times if you see the guy greats like Coltrane and Davis and Sun Ra, their
Uh-huh.
pieces would evolve over time. They don't
Right.
stay static. They have a
Right.
structure, but the structure depends on how they feel that night, what it's gonna
Yeah.
be. And I
Yeah.
always like that is what I kinda strive for because then the audience feels what you feel that at that moment. It's like a
Mhm.
poetry slam. If you go out
Mhm.
and do the free form poetry and you do free verse poetry, which is a lot of
Yep.
what hip hop is it's like free verse
Yeah.
poetry,
Yeah. And
That's
rap
what it is.
too is astonishing to
Yeah.
me, how they can even speak that fast is,
Yeah, and they
but,
remember it too. Some of these things are pages and pages long.
I
If you look at
know.
some of them, they're like mini books, and you're like,
Yeah.
"How do you remember that dense a level of lyrics?" But when
Yeah,
you
it's
trust yourself and you're in that mindset, then you remember it, and that's what
yeah.
people don't forget, like, your brain is so powerful, like, when you're into that, like, wow, that you actually can retain that full structure and let it evolve depending on what it is going on that night, but I think that that's a lot of things that people like they put things on the page too much in some cases, and
Uh-huh.
then they rely on it instead
Right.
of actually trusting in your creative capability.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's fascinating. It makes me think of Homer also because he was a traveling poet and all of those things were memorized. They weren't written. So, yeah, like
Yeah,
you said, hundreds and hundreds of lines. And the brain is amazing. That's what I say to my students. I say, you're brilliant. I don't, because you were born a human and is as messed up as human beings are, we have these amazing brains. And the
yeah.
unconscious brain is more powerful than the conscious brain in many ways.
I
So
think
that's really,
original work
yeah.
like what you're doing is never we're never gonna have a moment where an AI writes a novel like the way you write a novel, in my opinion. I think
Yeah.
it will approximate anything that's ever been done before. And it will be
Yeah.
amalgamation and try to do something, but I just don't think it can have the insight unless you fully get a sentient AI being that approximates an actual individual that
Right.
suddenly
Right.
has more than what it learned it has its own personality. I haven't seen that. Like, you know,
No.
the idea that you actually have an android that has its own mind and its own heart, and it says, "I am not gonna work for the boss. I am
Right.
my own being, and I have
Right.
my own ideas." I don't see that yet, but I mean, but that's where something might have an original idea. But, like, if it doesn't
Yeah.
get to that state, then it's not really super original.
Yeah. I did a little messing around with AI just because, as a teacher, we have to know what's coming.
Check out what's
So
coming, yeah.
what I did is I hate writing jacket copy for my books, like I could write a 300-page novel, but when I have to write that little description that goes on the
Yeah,
back,
it's
it
good at
just
that, it's good at that kinda thing.
it's like you wanna tear your hair out. So I thought, well, I'll try chat I did it wasn't ChatGPT, but it was one of those.
ChatGPT, but
And
more
I
like
have
it.
to admit, yes, it was good. It was good. What AI seems to be good at is putting together sentences that sound really good, but don't really say anything at all. Like when you really
Yeah,
ask yourself, but what is it saying? It's not really, it's just saying it's a brilliant, they stirred up the consequences and they struggle for their life, but it's like, you could say that
what is it
about
really
pretty
saying?
much any book on the planet. So yeah,
Yeah,
I think you're right. It's not it's pretty easy to tell right now when something's been generated by AI. If it's hyperbolic and doesn't say anything,
yeah.
probably AI.
It's like it's scared, like, what the human nature is willing to push things, and the AI to
Yes,
me doesn't push the way a real creative mind will push into places and maybe do things that aren't expected, and
right,
a computer's gonna have a hard time doing something unexpected because it's trying to do algorithms that are expectations, right?
right,
So it's designed to try to get the most people to like it, and
right.
sometimes when you're an artist, the first thing you do, nobody likes it. Right? When you try to do something new and you jump into that new zone, and if AI is kind of discouraged from doing anything
Yeah,
that takes risk that would drop your numbers down, then
yeah,
it's not going to take those risks, and that's where the human being is always going to win because we're
yeah.
able to do that, and they won't. I don't think it will do that because it'll like, oh, I'm not winning. So
Well, and I think it can be used. Like I don't I think all creatives use tools of various kinds. We
yeah, yeah,
use
there's a tool like a
thesauruses,
calculator.
and so I think it can be
Yes,
used as a tool, but ultimately you need the human mind choosing which of these sentences. Like it's going to give you 5 different versions of the sentence, and you have to decide which one is the best one. And
you're
and
still the boss. I mean, that's the
right,
thing is like you're still the
right.
boss. It's like we use it in music, we use it as a workflow tool to
Uh-huh.
maybe blue sky something. Like say I put down a mix and then I
Uh-huh.
want to run through 10 variations, give me 30 seconds or 1 minute of what it sounds like if I use a Fleetwood Mac rumors mix
Yeah,
versus like a Tom Petty mix versus a
right.
Beatle mix versus a Who
Right.
mix. Like so I run me through these situations. I wouldn't have that equipment.
Right. Right.
Run this like I was running through all those preamps and all those modules and run like you were doing it and show me.
Right. Right.
Then I can decide I'm still the artist. So I say, well, you know what? Maybe I want a little Fleetwood Mac here, a little Beatles here. And I go and I choose what points it's going to use the different levels. That
Yeah.
still becomes a tool that to me, I'm still in charge of it. I'm still
Right.
making decisions. And what I chose to do isn't probably going to map to anything anybody else did
Right.
because I kind of use it in a very delicate way or making adjustments in a very human way.
Right.
Instead of
So it
saying
could
90%, it's 100% whatever the computer tells me. That I think
right.
that's the mistake. It's like, you're probably not gonna do that.
Right, right. Don't follow the computer. Use the computer to kind of prod yourself out of your ruts, because I think we all get into ruts.
Yeah,
And so, that can be the AI could be used to give yourself a new idea. But ultimately, I almost found it harder, I have to say, because it gave me so many versions that it was harder for me to
didn't know what
choose.
to choose.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's kinda like
Um,
it's kinda a problem when you're an artist if you do 99 demos, and right, and
yes.
the first 4 takes are actually
Yeah,
the best one, but you're thinking because
yeah,
you did number 99, the number
right.
100 is the best one. But guess what?
Exact
Number 4 is the
yeah,
best one. So as
right,
if you give
right.
yourself too many choices, you can wreck your work.
Yes.
That's what we find a lot of times, like, we can over layer. As a musician,
Yes.
I could do 64 tracks, and it
Yep.
might sound better with 6,
Right.
it might sound better with 4, it's like, but I go crazy putting tons of layers in and shadow
Yeah.
vocals and all kinds of stuff. Did I really need to do that? Probably
Yeah.
not, but because you
Yeah.
can, you get too many choices. Sometimes it's better to leave space,
Yep.
better to leave places where you're not putting so much in, and that's
Yep.
the hard when you get too many choices, so that's like you have to learn to kinda scale back a little bit.
Right, and that takes, I think, years, right? It takes years of listening and thinking and interacting to kind of develop that judgment that you're talking about of, like, maybe less is more here, you know?
Yeah, it's kinda case by case, once in a while you get
Yeah.
something that's like born to run, and you're gonna
Yeah.
do that wall of sound, and it
Yep.
applies to that song, but then
Yeah.
Nebraska, that doesn't apply, right? If you go do a
Yeah.
song like, the whatever, the 4-track things on Nebraska, like, that's not what he did with Born to Run. That's a very layered Spectre wall of sound, but that
Yeah.
song kinda needed it. But not
Yeah.
every song needs it. That's the choice as an artist, is like you choose to do the song that's a 4-track, not that great microphone, but it sounds so good that you leave it that way. You leave it almost
Yeah.
like a demo because that song
Right.
deserves to be that way. And that's the
Right.
choice that a human being can only make, in my opinion.
Right.
That's the kind of artistic choices when you're a writer. Like, did you need to kind of pull this at the last minute, this idea that you didn't really know that you wanted to do, and then suddenly off the cuff it comes in, and that becomes like the heart part, the big part of your book is something you didn't even think you were gonna put in.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
it might not even be planned, and it suddenly comes, and then you make the decision. Oh, I'm gonna put that in. You know?
I love that moment, don't you? It's just to me, that's like that's the payoff. That's like when you surprise yourself and you come up with something that you didn't intend. It's such a good thing. It's such a good feeling, you know?
Yeah, that's the magical, I come to call 'em happy accidents, the way we
Yeah.
look at it in music is that
Yeah.
you could be sitting there trying to plan it, and something somebody does is like, "Oh, that's the thing that they changed the whole song." The drummer goes and suddenly shifts into something, and I'm like, That's the whole thing." And then now we gotta do this, like, that's the piece we were missing, and
Yes.
you never know who does it. The bass player could do it, the drummer could do it, the singer could do it. Somebody doing
Yeah.
tambourine could do it. It's like whoever comes up with that extra bit, and I'm always, like, listening and to try to not have
Yeah.
the ego to, like, let other people, contribute, and if they
Yeah.
contribute something that's gonna really do it and not just like, "Oh, that's bad," "Just do it my way." Like, no, you kinda gotta, and even to yourself, you have to listen to your kinda idea where you might have had this 90% idea, and then this thing comes out, and it's like you gotta listen to that thing that came out of nowhere. Is that really
Yeah.
what it's different than your 90%, but that's actually it.
Yes. Yeah, and I love too how, time really becomes an important part of that as well. So in novel Beyond Sight, the ghost novel, that whole second plot, in fact, the idea of this house belonging to a Black family was a kind of a late idea. Like, I had been writing it the whole time as a white family, and then, I don't know, it's one of those things you go to a demonstration and you see there's been a lot of art in Saratoga Springs lately about how there were these Black neighborhoods that were vibrant communities. They were vibrant, economic centers, restaurants and things like that, and then, of course, urban renewal came along and they were like, "We need a park here." And they
Of course,
kind of
yeah.
drove that community out. So that's what got me thinking. So,
Mhm.
it was just a matter of it was kind of like I had written that novel 10 years ago, but it had to wait 10 years for me to go to that art show to go, "Oh, I need to change this."
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there's all kinds of things that happen that you go back, you look at something. Sometimes I look at something I wrote 10 years ago, and I
Yeah.
had it on the shelf, and then suddenly I bring it back because it's like, that's where my head's at now. And then
Right.
maybe it wasn't going anywhere, and then suddenly it's like, "Wow, now I know what to do with this." And I
Yeah.
think as an artist, we have our archive of our ideas and our journals and our tapes and our demos and all of our, hidden in the side of the room, a painting or something you didn't finish, and you're like, "Oh, maybe I
Mhm.
should finish that."
Yes, I love that. Yeah, so, like, eventually all your work becomes revision because you've developed enough of a body of kind of archived things that there's always something else that you can pull out, you know? That's
Yeah,
funny.
you pull from your
Yeah.
short stories, you pull from your journals, and then
Yeah.
suddenly something pull from a dream and you put it down. Like a lot of us, you get a dream and wake up and you write it down, you put it on tape, or we're always in a creative space. You never know where the muse is going to come.
Yeah,
Come
I
in the
love my
woods,
dreams.
come
Yeah,
in the car, put the
yeah,
voice memo on while you're driving, take the memo down, put it down. It's like, it's just kind of like you learning not to miss the opportunity.
yeah.
But
I think
yeah, I
art
think
is so important. I mean, all kinds of art, it's all the same thing, whether it's music or writing or painting. It's all art and so important to the human soul. I mean, I really think with climate change, there's going to be a lot of disaster coming our way, and
yeah,
we're going to be experiencing a lot of suffering and seeing a lot of suffering. And it's art that is going to keep our humanity
keep us
intact.
true.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's the poetry that some people pine about. So why are they singing poems? It's like
yeah,
poetry is, they were people reading poems, every battlefield and every war. There's
yeah,
people, there were poets and there were people who were inspirational, making statements. It's like, so the idea that like poetry is somehow like, oh, that's not important. Poetry is a human expression. It's very important.
yes.
It's
You said something also earlier that I want to circle back to. I know we're running out of time here, but you said something about the album is the whole thing. It's like you don't want to just listen to just the song. You have to listen to the whole album. Same
the
thing
whole
with
piece.
poetry. Like so often we just read, like in school, we were just given one poem, but really it's like you need to read the whole book because when you read the whole book of Wordsworth, you start to see that
Yeah,
he's got like a dictionary, like he's got a lexicon, and you start to kind of understand his
of
code when you
words.
read
Yeah.
all the poems together. Yeah. So it's like
Yeah,
what people
like
don't
you read
realize, it's like you
read
could
Lord
just
Byron.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, read Lord Byron, and you get the Little Death, and you get these Looking Glass, and you get these concepts. Get like
Mhm.
Blake and his Songs of Innocence and Experience, and you really dive into it, and you find out they were written on metal plates with like
Mm.
acid, and there's actually art that goes with every poem. Like
Yeah,
every one of the
yeah,
songs of innocence and experience, there's a picture that goes
yeah.
with that poem, and sometimes we didn't know that. In
It's
school,
so
we just saw the poem,
beautiful.
"Tiger, tiger,"
Alright.
right? But you didn't actually see the picture that goes with it, right? And then see
Yeah,
all the other poems that go with that collection. It's a piece.
yeah.
The
Oh,
songs
now
of
you're gonna have to
innocence and
set that to
experience.
music. Now
Yeah,
you
well,
now
I've
you should
always been
take
into
Blake
that.
and yeah, yeah. That's cool.
Yeah, his work is very inspirational to a lot of modern musicians. Get
Really?
pulled into Blake. Yeah, Songs
I
of
did not
Innocence and
know
Experience,
that.
where a lot of us get pulled into it just because the way he writes compared to the other Victorians is more concise.
Uh-huh.
It's not as elaborate as Wordsworth or Longfellow or Hawthorne or any
Yeah,
of the rest of them.
yeah,
It's they're
yeah,
they're they're short compared to other
yeah,
Victorian poets, and they're easier to kinda comprehend, but they still have a lot of depth, even though they're
yeah,
short. And you're like,
yeah,
"Wow." It really speaks to a lot of people because it's easier to kinda digest them. But,
yeah. Well, now
uh,
you've given me some
thank you again for
homework.
being on the show. It
Yep,
was
yep. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much for having me. So, yeah, check
Thank
out
you.
my
Have a great
site,
night.
Lâle
Yes.
Davidson.
Yeah, we'll
Yep,
have
take
the
care. Great talking to you. Bye-bye.
yeah, this will we'll give you the landing page, and so you'll have that until tomorrow. But, thank you.
Alright. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.